painting something impressive doesn't necessarily require skill. So today I'm stepping away from my comfort zone and showing you some painting hacks that'll do all the heavy lifting for you. I started this project in sub-assemblies because the dynamic pose of the model would have made it difficult to access certain areas comfortably. Working in parts just made the whole process cleaner and easier to manage. Now, I know some of you are already side-eyeing the fact that I'm using an airbrush, but I promise you, once I'm done with this initial base coating stage, there are valuable lessons coming your way, so just bear with me for a minute. Still, I don't want anyone to feel left out, so for the viewers who don't have an airbrush, I'll link down below another tutorial of mine where I painted a dreadnought using a simple sponge for this step instead. This way, anyone can follow along no matter the tools you have. But there is a reason to why I chose to use an airbrush here, and it ties into something I talk about often: trying new things, both to avoid falling into repetition and to challenge ourselves a little more with each project. In this case, I wanted to try out a very clean style, something I don't usually aim for in my models, something more in line with mecha modeling like Gunpla. And to help with that, I am trying out Galeri's Kaleido paints. They are acrylic based, but they simulate that smooth, glossy lacquer finish you see often in automotive and aircraft modeling. As you can tell, this is far from my usual comfort zone of grimdark or fantasy, but because of that, the process felt fresh, fun and exciting to explore. The application itself wasn't complicated, just 2 or 3 layers of red thin 50-50 with the thinner that came in the box, followed by a zenithal spray of orange on each part individually. I knew these paints were airbrush ready straight out of the bottle, but I still prefer to build up my layers slowly and make use of the transparency of the black and white zenithal prime to help define the lights and shadows without any effort on my part. Once I was done with the airbrush work, I continued by applying the remaining base coats with the brush, just 3 colors, mainly white and a metallic, and then I applied the gloss varnish over them to match the finish of the red armor. From here, it was time to pin wash all the recesses and panel lines, to boost the contrast and definition. And while I'll be using oil paints for this step, in the Dreadnought tutorial I mentioned earlier, I show you how to achieve the exact same effect using acrylic paints and water, through my trusty water trick technique. Now back to today's video, leaving your oil paints on a piece of cardboard for a couple minutes is a great way to absorb any excess oil that might have separated from the pigment. Some brands separate more than others, so this step gives you a more consistent, workable paint and reduces drying time. Over on my aluminum palette, I diluted the oil paint with double the amount of white spirits, or in my case, odorless solvent from my local art shop. A synthetic liner brush is the best tool here, as it has a fine tip but can hold a substantial amount of paint. With it, you simply touch the tip of the brush to a recess and the magic happens thanks to capillary action. This is the biggest strength of oils over acrylic washes. And let me place a big disclaimer here. Yes, the gloss varnish or even just the glossy finish of these lacquer-like paints definitely improves the flow of the oil wash, but it is by no means a requirement. I have shown plenty of examples in the past using oil paints without any sort of varnish, and while a glossy surface helps, it is not a necessity. Now, while the process looks impressive, you probably noticed the overspills where the brush touches the model, but they are just as easy to clean as the paint was to apply. Before cleaning though, you want the oils not to fully cure, since that will take overnight, but you do want the solvents to evaporate, which you can speed up with a blow dryer. Once the solvents evaporate and the stains look something like this, they can simply be cleaned by wiping them with your finger. Or, if you don't want to get your hands dirty, you can use a Q-tip. What matters is that whatever you use is not large enough to reach into the recesses. That's how the wash stays where it needs to. But if you try to clean while the paint is still wet and diluted, you risk the Q-tip absorbing the paint from inside the recesses. So remember to let the solvent evaporate first. And because different brands and colors of oil stain differently, there is an extra step you can take to get a clean result. You can dampen the Q-tip with a bit of solvent. Just make sure to unload the excess on a paper towel first. If not, you risk flooding the recess, reactivating the paint and pulling it out completely. Finally, you can also use your liner brush to shape and clean edges by loading it with a small amount of solvent. This time, unlike with the Q-tip, you actually want it to be slightly wet, so it works both as a cleaning and absorption tool. With the cleaning done, the definition was off the charts, and honestly you could call the model finished here, but I did want to push a bit further with some highlights. However, because my surface was glossy and I needed the paint to grip better for the next technique, I applied a matte varnish over the whole model. And I've gotta say, the Kaleido matte varnish is ultra matte, more than I expected. I'll admit it killed quite a bit of the richness of the color, but a final satin varnish later on will bring the color back. For now though, we have a perfect surface for edge highlighting, and using the side of the brush makes this step almost fail-proof. It doesn't matter how hard I press down. As long as I place the brush perpendicular to the edge, there is nowhere else for the bristles to go except along that edge. This makes picking out all those shapes much easier than trying to follow the lines with just the point of the brush. And sure, even with this technique making things easier, edge highlighting isn't exactly the fastest part of our hobby. There are so many tiny shapes, so many little corners, it can feel endless if you focus only on the finish line. But this is where patience becomes your best ally. Every stroke is a choice to slow down, to breathe, to give the model the attention it deserves. And the crazy thing is, the more present you are, the more rewarding this step becomes. Because edge by edge, you start to see the transformation happening under your hand. And that's when it clicks. This hobby isn't about rushing till the end. It's about showing up, taking your time, and realizing that you can do something detailed, deliberate, and honestly pretty amazing. The highlights aren't just on the model. They are a reminder of what you are capable of when you keep going, even when it feels tedious. The combination of the black paint wash and the yellow-orangey highlight results in an incredible definition and contrast. This makes the model super recognizable and helps it stand out immediately on the tabletop. Although not as striking, I also added highlights to the metallics and to the white, which was the secondary color and deserved a bit of attention. Nothing dramatic, only the kind of small highlights most people overlook. But giving attention to these little moments is how your work becomes something you are proud of. White can be a tricky color to paint, and I went for a volumetric approach similar to the airbrush base layer. To get close to that look, I laid a pure white volumetric highlight over the off-white base tone, using a couple of semi-diluted coats. Then I blended it back into the base tone with a few layers of that same base tone but diluted to a glaze consistency. Overall, this project didn't use many paints or techniques, but it was something I have never done before, and which I would like to try out again, making some more creative choices. Both the sword and the base are things which will get a dedicated video once I feel I can teach it in a useful manner, so I would call it here for today. Thank you very much for watching the video till the end. I hope that you learned something useful. And if you also want to explore this style using the new Gallery paint range, a discount code to their store will be linked in the description.